Good evening, everyone, and welcome and happy Ada Lovelace Day.
Is it okay to be watched so deeply? And is it okay for these algorithms to an extent, hack into our weaknesses, into our weak points, into our dreams, into our tastes, and sometimes know us even better than our own friends will know us? So there is nothing more public than a piece of personal data, really. And privacy-enhancing technologies, to me, are the future.
Hello, and welcome to this very special episode of the Teens in AI podcast. This episode was recorded live on Ada Lovelace Day, a day where we recognise all of the amazing achievements of women in STEM. Today, Elena and I talked to Ivana Bartoletti, Technical Director at Deloitte. We discussed politics, privacy, geography, and bias in AI.
And so, Ivana, tell us a little bit about the Ada Lovelace Day and why do you think this is such an important day to celebrate and recognize?
It is a very important day, and it is because for two main reasons. First of all, because women all across history, all along history, we have made an enormous contribution to every single discipline. But so many of the times, our contributions have not been recognized. And if you this is happening in mathematics, in engineering, in literature, in every single area of the arts, everywhere. So when we say that we celebrated the Ada Lovelace Day, we not only do we celebrate one woman, we celebrate all the pioneers, the ones who have been so instrumental to get us where we are now as a society, but they have not been recognized, listened to, and whose work has been used and appropriated by somebody else, often men.
And as we look forward to the future of tech and the future of AI, can you explain a bit about the potential impacts of a lack of representation of women in tech and other underrepresented groups as well, and maybe give us some examples of the impacts that this has?
Yes, this is a really good question. At the moment, I think we are seeing some amazing things that technology is doing, some really, really good things. And especially when you look, for example, the healthcare sector, when you look at how much you can use artificial intelligence to detect a disease before it becomes more serious. Or if you can use artificial intelligence, for example, to understand if there is a pattern that is not there anymore. And then, for example, you can see how much artificial intelligence is improving mammographies. Or, there is a lot of good that is happening right now. And this is really, really important. But in order, I think, to harness the value of this technology, we really need to be able to recognize and mitigate the risks. And this is where I think having more diversity becomes absolutely important. The power that artificial intelligence has is huge on the way that it's reshaping the labor market, the way that it reshapes global geopolitical dimensions, the way that it really is becoming so, the issues around privacy and ethics are becoming so mainstream. And what I would like to see is more women, more diversity, so that we don't have the same things that we've had, for example, with the A-level fiasco. We don't want this sort of errors, these mistakes to happen. What we want is artificial intelligence and this technology to work for everybody, to increase the opportunities, not to close off the world and to bring from sort of the back door a lot of the inequalities that we wanted to dismantle in the first place. And we don't want these technologies to bring back stereotypes or to actually scale up the stereotypes and turning them into prejudices. So this is why we want more women, more young women into this discipline, so that we can really use artificial intelligence for the common good, for the best of our society, and not really to bring back a lot of very terrible things that we have been fighting a lot against.
Brilliant. And Ivana, you speak a lot of privacy tech. When you speak of privacy tech, what do you mean?
So privacy is a really important thing. And I say this as somebody who doesn't view privacy as an individual right. And I know this might sound strange, but a lot of people, a lot of time when I say that I'm in privacy law, people think, oh, here's the crazy woman who is probably looking at every single privacy notice, doesn't want to share data with anybody, is really worried about, and she's the one, who doesn't want any innovation. And I say, no, it's the opposite, really. I actually do not really care. I know it sounds provocative. I don't really care so much about my own personal data. I actually value privacy as a collective aggregate good. For me, privacy is a collective value. It's something that we should value as a society. And to me, privacy means how can we harness the value of the data that we've got in a way which respects people's autonomy and dignity, but actually is focused on innovation, is focused on sharing for the common good. And for me, that's how I see privacy. And to an extent, a lot of this has become clear during the pandemic, because during the pandemic, whether you are based in London as I am now, or in Brazil, or in anywhere in Lebanon or Syria, whatever in the world, there's one thing that is really important, is that we are all together into going through this, and there is nothing more valuable from a collective perspective than our own personal information. If we want research to progress, we need data to be shared. We need our personal data to have this fantastic public value and be shared so that we can improve medicine, we can find new drugs, and we can understand how this terrible disease is really influencing our bodies. So there is nothing more public than a piece of personal data, really. And privacy enhancing technologies to me are the future, because it means that we can respect our own individuality, our own dignity as individuals, but at the same time, our data can be used for the common good. And when I think about privacy, for example, one of the things that really infuriate me is where people say, you can't have everything. You can have privacy or you can have security. You can have privacy or you can have public health. You can't have everything. And I always say, no, you can. So it's 2020. We can use data in a very private, privacy preserving way. We don't need to really breach everybody's confidentiality. You can really harness the value of data in a way which respects individuality. But there is one area where I think, we need to change. And where I would like to see a younger generation, especially of women, to really lead from the front. And this is the area of privacy as individual autonomy. So young people, what I would like to see is to lead from the front on privacy as the freedom from being surveilled all the time. And I don't mean surveillance as simply the cameras or facial recognition. I mean surveillance in terms of the behavioral analytics and algorithms that are like supercomputers pointed at us all the time, looking at all what we do on the internet, putting us into a particular pattern and then targeting us based on that particular pattern we belong to. This is all AI driven. This is all machine learning driven. And we've really got to ask ourselves, is it okay to be so much scrutinized? Is that okay to be watched so deeply? And is that okay for these algorithms to an extent hack into our weaknesses, into our weak points, into our dreams, into our taste, and sometimes know us even better than our own friends would know us?
Yeah, that's so interesting to think about where do we draw the line with AI and what it can and can't access in terms of our data. And you touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to talk about one specific issue in data privacy, and that is the controversy surrounding Facebook and other social media sites abusing data privacy. And I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit about this and specifically about how we can stop things like this happening in the future.
I think not just Facebook, but a lot of these big companies, they have made the most of a time where there was no much regulation around the internet. And if you think about how long it took to have the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. It took decades, to create something which still is probably not even fit for purpose in 2020. But and because technology evolves really quickly, so the digital advertising, for example, it's a privacy free zone. It's something. Sometimes when you click on something, sometimes your data gets broadcast out to millions and millions of companies, which form part of a unruled and unaccountable ecosystem. And that's not Facebook. That's the huge amount of companies that form part of this, what is called in technical terms the real-time bidding process, which is the huge amount of bidding that happens behind every single advert that you see when you go on a website. So it's the entire ecosystem has been allowed to grow wild, unaccountable and unfettered because of lack of regulation. We need to work towards a global framework around privacy, because at the moment you have the European data protection framework, which is good. It's an evolving tool, and Europe has always been at the forefront. But what Europe is doing is not just saying, oh yes, we love privacy. It's also saying we've got to compete in a global world, and to compete in a global world, one way of doing so is to set standards. So the rest of the world, if they want to trade with us, they have to comply. There is a lot happening at a global level right now, and I think companies like the big sort of the big Facebook and Google, they are, of course, they will need to come to terms with more privacy scrutiny happening. But I also feel, and especially on Facebook and on Google and on the big ones, I also feel that privacy law is no longer sufficient to deal with the abuses of privacy. And that is because data is power. And data is massive power that companies have. It's not just, data is not oil. Data is not, that's really about capital. This is like capital. And when there's capital, there is accumulation. And when there is accumulation, there's something called competition. And when there is competition, there's something called antitrust. So I do think that there is an issue around global competition and how much personal data play into this and play into the competition between companies, how much for example, personal data plays into mergers and acquisitions. So I think antitrust and privacy, they will probably become increasingly so a discipline that will work together in order to really tackle privacy violations, because I don't think that privacy in itself is going to be enough. I think the problem that we're seeing at the moment is that there are huge companies having a lot of data, and this asymmetry is staggering and is disempowering, not just for citizens, but it's also disempowering for other companies. It's not by chance that the European Union has said we actually want to make these big tech companies to give access to data to the smaller ones so that they can also grow. And how much of data access they will give, that's we don't know yet, but that's the idea of the European Union, because more and more, because data is about power, it's about capital, it's about accumulation, and it's how you make that available to smaller companies too, and in which form, so that other companies can also thrive.
Absolutely. And Ivana, we live in times of, political and economic turbulence. A lot is happening right now. And the question is, how can we work globally to align the laws and methods of data protection and AI regulation when, we're having to live in such turbulent times?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because if you think about it, at the moment, everybody's talking about an AI race, right? So you've got Putin, who says it's going to be whoever is going to lead in the world is going to lead on AI. Who's going to lead on AI is going to lead the world. Then you have the US and the recent strategy AI strategy, they basically phrase it and name it as a race, a global race. And then you have the European Union saying we're going to lead on standards and we're going to use the sort of Brussels effect, which is standards that the rest of the world has to adhere to. So this is the terminology. We have this terminology which is about race, which is about global competition, and at the same time we've got another phenomenon happening, which is called data, which is called sovereignty, where what is happening is that countries are saying whatever data is here needs to stay here, whatever we produce here has to stay here, but this is against a globalization, which is against the fact that a lot of companies, for example, in the US, rely on semiconductors in China. And so it's very difficult to square the digital sovereignty element and with the globalization, which has been the bedrock of our society for the last 50 years. So the thing is, within all this, it's very tricky to think, can we produce tools to govern the future of artificial intelligence? Similarly to what we did in the past with other things, like, for example, nuclear power. Nuclear power has enormous opportunities, but at the same time, enormous risks. And yet, we as the world, we managed to create tools. We managed to create bilateral agreements. We managed to say, to govern the disputes at global level, more or less. And sometimes I think, will we be able as a world to, for example, govern these really big, complex issues? For example, automated weapons. Will there be a tool saying, well, actually, life cannot be taken by a robot because it's so important that actually it's a human decision? Or will we actually get to a point where we will be governing this transformative sort of power of technologies on a global scale? We do need to think whether the international tools that we've got are sufficient. Do we need a universal declaration of digital rights? Do the set of norms that we have, do they work in this digital age? Sometimes I think, we protect human rights, we protect discrimination, but if discrimination is algorithmic, is human rights breaches our algorithms? Can we still find them out? Is it still possible to uphold human rights and anti-discrimination and all that in the age of algorithms without new solutions, without new agreements, and without a new without using the tools of international relationships and diplomacy? That's a question which is open, yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And I want to ask a little bit, something more focusing on the political side of things. So, there's a lot of discussion and debate about the role of rapid technological advancement that we've seen in the past decades and its relative role in the rise of the right wing and a sort of return to more conservative ideals in global politics. And, whilst this may be down to many other factors like an increase in immigration and things like this, I was wondering whether you thought there was any truth in the assertion that technological advancement had a role to play in this, and what's your opinion about that?
So technology is not a neutral thing. So technology, a technological artifact, whatever it is a social political tool. If I collect data about society, that data will never be neutral. That data will be a picture, a mirror of what society looks like, including centuries of inequality and structural racism and whatever it is. So when we live in this world where it has the mantra of data-driven society, I just feel a bit of horror because I'm like, well, data is great, but it's not neutral. I mean, I don't want to be data-driven. I want to be fairness-driven, because if I'm data-driven, then I'll be coded into the systems all the social inequalities, all the racism, all the data that is actually the mirror of a society that I'm actually trying to change. Thank you very much. If you historically, women earn less than men, and they go and ask for a loan, yeah, then obviously the algorithm, without proper strategy and without proper assessment and without a bit of equality in the mind of who's created them, will give less credit to a woman, because historically women have been earning less. If you send out job ads adverts, obviously, if women have been earning less, then you would send job adverts that pay less for jobs that pay less to women, and jobs that pay more to men, because historically this is always as it happened. And the same with recruitment. You know, if you want to recruit an engineer, and most of engineers have been men, and you just create a machine to do the recruitment exercise for you without putting some due diligence into it, then obviously it's more likely that as it happened with Amazon, that you know that the CVs that Bill pulled out will be all male. So we've got to be really, really careful when we use this data, and we take this data and use it to feed the machines that we're creating. This is where the disruptive and dangerous power of technology might come from. And this is where this is something that I really fear. But we've got to be really careful, though, and I always say this to the younger generation in particular, that you can have the most perfect algorithm. You can create the most perfect tool whereby you make all the ethical decisions, and you say that, you know, yes, women have had less earning power. Nonetheless, I am introducing fairness into the algorithm. Because it's the right thing to do. You can have the most perfect, and you can have the perfect algorithmic fix. However, that doesn't make the technology fair in itself. And this is what Joy Buolamwini says beautifully when she says algorithmic fairness is very different from social justice. And I think a lot of people are waking up to this right now. And for those of us who are in the Western world, you know, we've seen the inextricable link between technology as surveillance and privacy as control with Black Lives Matter, where we've seen that, you know, the use of surveillance technologies wrapped around the most vulnerable in our society. And we've seen that there's nothing neutral about this technology. And you could have the perfect facial recognition system, which recognizes every single Black woman and is no longer racist as a system, but then you will still deploy that in a racist way by deploying these cameras in some areas and not in others. And the reason why I'm saying this is because it's really important, especially for the younger generation, to realize that, yes, you know, it's important to work on the algorithmic fix. It's really important to create tools that enable you to be fair in the way that you use artificial intelligence and the way that the systems makes choices. But at the same time, it's really, really important to use AI for the right thing and to create tools that are and to understand that what you are producing is a social technical tool that exists in a particular context and breathes the context where that tool is being deployed. And technology's got this huge power, really perpetuate a lot of the hierarchies in society today. So people and younger people will decide to go into tech, into coding. They need to understand that, you know, they are embracing not just a technical career, but a technical social one. There is a lot of social politics into any single technological artifact.
And we've touched upon in this episode so many of the challenges that my generation and younger generations are going to have to tackle both socially and within tech and AI. So I wanted to ask what advice you'd give to everyone listening to this podcast or watching this live stream, all of these young, interested people who want to go into tech and AI. What advice would you give them?
So I think if you want to go into technology, into AI, just go for it. Yeah, just go for it and be prepared to learn always. But also, I would say, be very multidisciplinary. You know, don't think that is either coding or dancing, or is either coding or poetry, or is either, you know, there is a lot of need for multi-dimension and multidisciplinarity here. You know, we are talking about the future, and it's really important that, you know, we're able to bring different disciplines together. So I would say just go into technology, but don't think that the only way to go into AI is coding. There's so many different ways. You know, you can go into AI from philosophy. You can go into AI from history or human resources. There are so many ways, because AI is transformative and transforms everything. And therefore, there are so many different ways and so many different approaches. And so I say to people, yes, just to young people, just go for it 100%, just go into, but always realize that it's not just about the technology. There is far more than that. And if you're very strong in the tech, and if you're going to be the real transformative person who is going to do something great, then it's about bringing other disciplines with you. And if you do that, then I think it's an incredible added value.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Tune in next week as we talk with some of the incredible young people who have participated in our Ada Lovelace Hackathon. For regular updates and information, please follow us on Twitter at TeensAI Pod.